Hello and welcome to episode 27 of The Climate Skeptic. I'm your host, Laurie Wastel, an associate editor at the Daily Skeptic. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Ben Pyle, who is a Daily Skeptic regular and journalist. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks for having me back, Laurie. Good to see you again.
Yes, very, very good to have you back. And you've written a cracking essay for us this week, Ben, which I really do recommend. So, after years and years of the green agenda eroding the business and industry of the whole country, frankly, but especially, the working classes, their unions have suddenly noticed that this seems to be a little bit of a problem. And so there's you pinpoint Sharon Graham, the boss of Unite, one of our largest unions, who notes that the imminent closure of the Lindsay oil refinery is a problem, and that, it turns out net zero policies are hurting workers, she said, and even it's time the government showed them whose side it is on. But as you've argued, Ben, it's too little too late.
I think it is too little too late. And Unite's approach has been to sort of to try and get something out of the net zero agenda, seemingly for its members. And so that's organised around its slogan, no ban without a plan. And the ban, of course, is the ban on fossil fuels. And the plan is to give every worker who loses their job a role in the so-called net zero economy, or the transition. But that's fundamentally misconceived. It's incredibly naive. And people have been arguing from the outset of the green agenda that it requires the impoverishment of ordinary people, that there is no possibility of a just transition mathematically or physically, because the task of reorganizing the entire economy or these entire industries is so onerous and counter to physics that something's got to give. I mean, a lot of left-wing ideology is sort of geared around the idea that there exist sort of corporations and billionaires with bottomless bank accounts, but actually when you do the arithmetic, that kind of level of redistribution, it doesn't exist. So, I mean, as mighty fine as it might sound in principle to sort of cope with the pain of what a transition to a low carbon economy might be, in practicality, it's an impossibility. And I think if principles can't stand up in real life, then they're not genuine principles at all. And so that forced me, I think, and I've probably neglected the issue of the unions and their role in this for quite a long time, perhaps because we've had a Conservative government rather than a Labour government for most of that time. So I remember ringing up when there was a Labour government. In fact, I rang around all the unions in about 2009, asking them for a comment on the Green Deal and asking them, what's this going to do for the workers? And the only comment I managed to get, because most of them didn't have much to say, was from the TUC, and that comment was, I hope I'm not talking to a climate change denier. And I was like, well, what's that got to do with the working conditions and salaries of working people? What's that going to do for jobs? And there's this huge oversight. Now that might be sort of understandable if unions were little organizations like us, Laurie, like the Daily Skeptic and the Climate Skeptic, which run on very little, but brings all this criticism together. Now, actually, it turns out that Unite, the union's membership fees are about £18 a month for a full-time worker, and it's got 1 million members. So it's turning over the best part of £260 million per year. And since the beginning of the climate agenda, which coincides with the formation of the Unite, it was an amalgamation of two other unions, that means that they've had in the order of £5 billion flowing through their accounts in that time. And yet they haven't managed to put together what should be at the centre of every organisation or every representative democratic organisation's agenda. And that's a B team or blue team or a red team or whatever you want to call it. Let's really scrutinise this policy agenda. We've got these resources. we can get people with the intellectual substance to put this together, but they don't seem to have done that. Yet there were those critics around at the time, even on the left, who could have pointed that out. So they've just instead seemed to have supported the policy agenda, even actually under the Tories, the Unite Union's submissions to the climate change committees call for evidence, and other quangos and other agencies calls for evidence, very supportive of net zero in general, and in particular, it's quite happy for the CCC to suggest to the government that people should be priced off the road and kicked out of their cars and nudged into particular forms of behaviour. It's quite happy to see the abolition of gas and the abolition of fracking, which is just an astonishing thing for a union that seemingly represents people in that sector to do. And yet now, of course, all those chickens have come home to roost. They're still not getting it. And today, coincidentally, is the day that the government has published the results of the auction round 7 for the contracts for difference, which are the supply contracts for renewable energy from about 2030 going forward. And they indicate again that it's mathematically impossible for the Labour government to achieve its promise of lower bills, because we're seeing a net 30% increase in the cost of wind power. And I mean, it wasn't Unite, it was GMB, which I believe is more involved with energy production than Unite is. But GMB have put out this tweet this morning saying what a wonderful thing it is. So these are millions of people who are not being represented by their unions. They're definitely not being represented by the Labour Party, which are used to claim to be the party of the working person. So there's millions of people who are essentially disenfranchised in ways that are just leave people without any kind of representation for the first time in perhaps centuries, certainly since the Labour Party first emerged a century or so ago.
Yes, and it isn't just an extraordinary betrayal, I think, Ben, particularly when you consider that the basic function of these organizations obviously is to advocate for the interests of their members, but also in an even more basic sense to identify what those interests are and be able to speak about them. But as you say, they've been embracing these woolly elite sort of language codes like a just transition, which does seem to very much obscure the reality of what this will mean and suggest that the mass hollowing out of our remaining heavy industries will somehow be able to be not too damaging to British working class life and industry if maybe there is some government subsidies or somehow that's really not explained. But yes, they haven't even been able to identify this fact that it's contrary to their interests and sort of have that be stated and have that be democratically contested. And instead, it's almost claimed that this won't be impacting them badly, and therefore we don't even have that debate.
That's right. Yeah, I think, and to put it sort of very simply, it's Davos language. Spoken in a regional accent, in as an incredibly patronising, sop to that section of the working population, and and how little those people have got for that. The Unite has given over that the same time it's taken £5.2 billion from its membership. It's given the Labour Party 70 million. It didn't even insist, for example, on a sunset clause to say, well, okay, what if the promises of the just transition don't materialise? You need to have some escape in the policy such that it stops. And that's never been put forward. And you have to wonder, what's going on behind the scenes then? How is it possible that all of these organisations, all of the civil society organisations, perhaps that's understandable, they're getting money from billionaire philanthropists and corporations, but there's no such route. We've looked a lot at the Daily Skeptic, at the role of billionaires in this. Charlotte Gill has sort of looked a lot at Mike Bloomberg and his role and his relationship with Sadiq Khan and stuff. And I and Chris Morrison have written about Christopher Hone, the hedge funder, who he puts about $260 million a year into the green blob. We've never really looked at the role the unions have played in this, and it must be very disappointing for people who are working in gas and oil or were working in coal to have been let down this badly.
Well, quite. And Ben, it does seem that there's been this extraordinary reversal of roles here. You have the unions accommodating themselves to the ideologies of the powerful, and as you say, speaking in Davos speak, but just with a regional accent. And that brings us on to another interesting development. It's in America that Donald Trump, the US president, is taking aim at the Federal Reserve and its chairman, Jerome Powell, in particular. And it very much seems like calling into question that sort of central tenet of internationalist liberal ideology. Let's say that the central bank has to be independent, and questioning their sort of status there in various ways. But what has really struck me is that you've had this, you had a statement from the European Central Bank, and it's, well, let me just read it to you, Ben, because it is really, really quite interesting. The ECB and other European and international central banks stand in full solidarity with the Federal Reserve System and its chair, Jerome H. Powell. And so on the one hand, we have the unions speaking in Davos speak, and now we have the central bankers of the world uniting and standing in solidarity, manning the proletarian barricades almost. So you're adopting that left-wing language, but in service of the most elitist and sort of class protectionism and bourgeois, you might even say, a crusade. I mean, it's just an extraordinary reversal of roles.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, it was the Labour Party that eventually gave the Bank of England its independence, certainly its independence with respect to monetary policy. And then what happened just a few short years later, all this independence didn't seem to protect us from the great financial crash of 2007 and 8, and all of the this independent working together of all these central banks doesn't seem to have put in place anything following that leaves us any better off. And I think, I mean, what independence really means, and I think this is where there are really interesting parallels between that form of economic policy and the climate change agenda, is that they are the sort of the fashion in the West was to create all of these quangos and all these independent bodies to develop policy and regulations and the such like independently of democracy. That's what they're independent from, not just independent from government, because we know that they're all rubbing shoulders with each other. They all think the same. The problem is the pesky voters, just as it's the